Hey, hey everybody. I'm gonna try this once again. Hey everybody. Gonna see if we can get this going. There we go. Hey,
Hello,
hey,
hello,
Seth.
hello. I am so sorry. I don't know what happened.
No, no, please. I'm glad we got it together. So thankful for your time. You are somebody who I personally have admired for such a long time, but certainly all the folks who are gonna be excited for this conversation, I'm sure admire. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. I know this moment of pause has opened up a lot more freedom with our time, but for you, I think you have so many things going on that your time is always sort of split.
I,
So
I am all yours. I was
I
looking forward
appreciate
to
you.
it.
um, okay, so for those of you all maybe who don't have reference point for Chef Pierre, this is Pierre Chen. He is not only a brilliant chef, he is a really brilliant writer and cookbook author, social entrepreneur, restaurateur, um, and really sort of someone who's responsible, I think, in important ways for helping us to contextualize the connection to the African diaspora, specifically West Africa, to the work we do here in the U.S. And it's something that has been probably one of the things I admire most about your work. Um, yeah, so I'm so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here and to see a lot of people that I haven't connected with since the Grand Dakar. Someone is texting me in Portuguese right now, so that's really,
Mhm.
really lovely to be here. And
I love
thank you
it.
for your very generous introduction, Therese. I really admire your work too, and also think that history is key to everything we're doing. Is key to our future. If you don't grasp our history, our food history, there's no food future for our people, for our culture.
Yes, sir. Um, there's so many spaces that I'd love to talk to you about. I think over the years watching you from every space from TED Talks to just personal conversations I've heard you have like in person. There's a sense sometimes that we know your story, but I mean, you have been in the culinary space for over 30 years. And I would love because I don't there's so many areas I would love to talk to you about, but I think that the context of your culinary life and how that story started is really interesting because it does, I think, speak a lot to the vision you seem to have, but it's really by also virtue of time and sort of observing this like a shift and change. So I'm wondering if you could start there.
Shift and change, indeed, indeed. I never set to become a chef. I was a student in Dakar. I grew up in Dakar, Senegal, and I was a student in physics and chemistry when I came to the United States. And my dream was to just finish my degrees in physics and chemistry. So on my way to a school in Ohio, a tiny school in Ohio in a town called Berea, I stopped by New York, and I had a friend here in New York. I stopped by New York, and 30 years later, I'm still in New York. So long story.
That's
but
right.
but that's how I discovered the culinary arts. I discovered it as a profession. Growing up in Senegal, it was not really an option for a boy to dream of becoming a chef because we were, culturally programmed to think that kitchen was for women, and so that's how I thought this to be kitchen for women. But I was also prepared for it in a way because not only for my chemistry background, because chemistry is also cooking, but food is a very important part of our culture in Senegal. Even though it's for women, everyone appreciates great food, and this is something we do on a daily basis. Every single day in Senegal growing up, we had to go home for lunch and for dinner, and it was something that was prepared freshly. Mother or aunts would go to the market on a daily basis. The fish we would eat was the fish that was caught today, and nothing frozen. The vegetables are locally grown. I mean, it was just, the whole thing was right. and we appreciated it. We just grew up in this surroundings of great food, really great food culture. So arriving in New York, my first job, it's a long story, but I was robbed when I was in New York, and I got stuck in New York, and I couldn't make it to Ohio, Berea, that town. And the other option was to return to Senegal, I was close to do that because I was very tempted to return. New York was a nightmare. It was just like late 80s in New York City.
Right.
If you have an idea of what it was, but it was the crack epidemic, AIDS pandemic, whatever, everything was just wrong. And but a friend of mine happened to be working in a restaurant, and that's how he got me this job. He was like, well, we're looking for a busboy. Would you be interested? And from the busboy position, I quickly connected with the kitchen. First of all, I was fascinated to see only guys in the kitchen. That was a cultural shock, But these guys were like, especially the chef. The chef was this great. He became a great mentor. He first of all, he loved practicing his French with me because he had studied in France, and he just saw that I was very fascinated by what was happening in the kitchen. I would bring the dirty plates in the kitchen, and I would just stay there fascinated, just looking at the beautiful plates they were making. And that reminded me of this cookbook. My mother had a cookbook collection, and something I was doing at an early age, even though I wasn't, programmed to become a cook, I had this interest. At an early age, I would just go through my mother's cookbook collection and look at the pictures, just the pictures were like, just looking so appetizing. And here I am in this restaurant in New York, and I see dishes that look just like these pictures of my mother's cookbook. So that's just how this whole thing came to be. And the chef thought I was interested, and he knew I wanted to do extra shifts because I wanted to make money, thinking I was going to save money and go back to school. And that's how he offered to take me and train me the way he had been trained, which is from the bottom up. And he's like, okay, when you're not doing your bussing tables, just come and start washing dishes. You make extra money from washing dishes. You see what we're doing, and you learn how to prep, how to peel vegetables, and this is really how it started. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like it at all at first. I was like, it was hard work, especially this restaurant was really busy. It was in the West Village. It's closed now. It's called Garvin's. And at the time, washing dishes was something I even never thought I would be doing. I was like, I'm a university guy, so it's below me. But today I'm so grateful for having gone there, because those are the key steps, understanding how the restaurant ladder works. And I went through every single step of the ladder, and over 30 years, this is where I am now. I'm still there. I have no regret. I found the best job in the world. That's not a job, because I love what I'm doing, and it's the chemistry. It's another form of chemistry, but it is.
That's right. It's like full circle. There are two things that come out of. Then thank you so much for, I'm sure you, over interviews over years have sort of relayed this sort of origin story, and so I'm grateful for you sort of giving it to us as well. But the two things that come out of that I'm really interested in. I got to talk to Chef Binta from Fulani Kitchen a couple weeks ago, and she's so dynamic and fascinating, and the work she does is so beautiful and specific. And she talked a lot about sort of your influence on her work, and this notion around I asked her a question that probably didn't get fleshed out enough, but there was a sense when she talked about the movement of the Fulani people and the work she's doing to try and sort of translate that to a restaurant setting, or sort of she uses the medium of pop-up, but sort of thinking about how you translate something that is so specific to her personal culture that doesn't necessarily have context in the space of a restaurant or the transactional nature of restaurants. I'm fascinated by that notion, because something about what you said about even the Senegalese kitchen not being a mainly female space, something about the work you do in terms of translating Senegalese, pantry, the palette, and sort of the dining experience in a restaurant setting is fascinating, because I wonder about do you feel anything gets lost in translation, and also how closely tied to culture it could be if it's in a context that is always shifting, and it's not necessarily the most, I don't know, welcoming or fully formed? I just would love to hear your thoughts, because there's something about that translation that is fascinating, and you do it so well, but I wonder about what that secret sauce is, because it doesn't necessarily happen that way.
So let me recap. Your question is, you want to understand how the translation
Well,
happened for
so
me?
yeah, I mean, could you talk about the context of like the colonial influence of the French on Senegal? But is certainly there. But there's something in the way, even in the way you talked about the way you grew up eating, right? This notion of the Senegalese table not being a restaurant table, it being about home cooking, it being about communal table, but not necessarily the transactional nature of restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talked to Chef Benta, she was talking about how the movement of the Fulani people is important, but that she's trying to translate culture through the medium of pop-up and the medium of restaurants. And I
Mm-hmm.
just wonder about what that, because we talk a lot about, in broad terms, about the cross-continental or diasporic conversation or
Mm-hmm.
translation, but we don't necessarily talk about what that means in the context of the business of restaurants.
Yes, yes. All right. That's a very, very, very important topic you're raising right now. This conversation within the diaspora, and to me, that really was something that was at the center, at the beginning of my very center to my career choice. A quick story is when I first arrived here. One of the reasons why I was tempted to return was the food. The food I was exposed to was like, I'm like, wow, I can't live on this food. I have to go back. I have to go back.
Yeah.
This is crazy. And until I had access to southern food, you know, and that's when I realized, wow, okay, there's hope. They have food, that tastes like mine, and that I made the connection then, it's like, this is our food. And that connection was already really confirmed after reading Jessica Harris books and other books, historian books that connected, of course, the Middle Passage and what contribution we had, which was the tastiest contribution in this country. This is the African contribution, and regardless of what they say, it's like, to me, the food culture is so much richer because of us, because of Black folks in America, and that became somewhat of a mission to me. Is like to take this as like at least an anchor to guide me towards where I'm going
Yes, sir.
in my explorations. And from the beginning, my first restaurant was about that. Yolele was about, introducing this food culture, but it was located in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And at the time, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn in the early 2000s is not what it is right now. So it
Right.
was, it was,
Right.
it was totally, what would be the word? Pioneering. It was pioneering, having having a restaurant with sit-down restaurant with a, beer and wine menu and the whole thing, when that whole area was a food desert, which is
Right.
unfortunately the case in many of our communities. It's like food deserts are there, and the reaction, the way the community embraced the restaurant, and it became this place, this cultural place, strong cultural place that showed how much people were starving for that, for that food culture. And that kept taking me, from Yolele. I wrote my first cookbook, and the way it was received also confirmed everything. And it kept going, it was organic, from Yolele I opened Le Grand Dakar. Le Grand Dakar was also this whole, I never wanted it to be just about the food. It was about the food culture, and Le Grand Dakar, we had these beautiful events that was really embracing the whole community. When we opened Le Grand Dakar, still in Brooklyn, that area was called the Shooting Alley. That's how bad it was. And we started organizing. I wanted to bring this feeling of a community, a neighborhood in Senegal, where we would close the block. We called it our block party, the Grand Dakar block party, right? We would close the block, and we would put a stage in the middle of the block, and invite drummers from Senegal, and we had a drum circle, and we would bring the food outside of the restaurant. We would have like this big barbecue and cook the whole lamb outside of the restaurant, and really have every single business in the community, and the community got involved. You know, it became so big that we would start to give something we call the Spirit of Africa Award, where we would recognize African American who had really contributed beautifully in connecting the diaspora. So we would have people like Randy Weston, late Randy Weston, who was like this amazing musician, but like just really just recognize how much jazz music is African. We had
Yeah.
we had Jeffrey Wright, the actor, who also
Yes.
is he's an amazing guy. He's been working, you know, outside of his acting career in Sierra Leone, just building a community there, and he was very generous with his time. You know, we had what's his name from the Fela musical. Anyway,
Yeah.
we had it kept, you know, it was beautiful, you know. So from the Grand Dakar, I closed the Grand Dakar. It was tough at some point, you know, when the community became like gentrified, you know, the rent got higher, and of course the next thing, you know, so I had to move on. So that's when I wrote my second cookbook. And the second cookbook, and each cookbook, you know, I really wanted to have a chapter dedicated to this middle passage. It started with my first cookbook. The chapter was about the connection between the food that traveled, you know, and talking about nomadic, the food that transcended the borders. And that's what food has in particular, that transcends the borders. And we were so beautiful, our culture in the African-American culture, the diaspora was, we kept that culture, and that's what really kept us alive. You know, we often don't think how powerful culture is, but food, music kept us alive, and that's, you know, that's so powerful that we survived something that no one was meant to survive. You know, that's just the reality of it. And that's why it's important to recognize this food and the role it played in our culture, and to really do our best to elevate it and present it. And that's why I admire what you're doing. I admire what Black food folks are doing. I admire what people like Jessica Harris and everyone in the community, you know, Kwame, JJ, everybody is coming along, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful community that's just gonna keep us take us to the next stage, you know. And that's what I try to do with Teranga. My restaurant Teranga is also about that, you know. Teranga was a different format. I saw the Teranga as a fast casual because this is 2020 now. We are at a time where, you know, we have to evolve, like I say, organically with the needs of the community, and New York City in particular. People are in a hurry, and you want also to be strategic in the way you introduce this food culture, knowing that a lot of time the media have portrayed us, Africans in particular, in a not so beautiful way. And that scares the consumers. You know, sometimes consumers come and in their ignorance, they just see African food and they get scared. So if you offer them a setup with a fast casual concept where they can make their own bowls, it's less intimidating. So that was the way I gradually introduced these ingredients and these plates through this concept, this fast casual concept. In addition, fast casual is something that you can scale up in a faster way, you know, than a restaurant itself. So you can have a greater impact. And I saw Teranga as a continuation of my company, Yolele Foods. I'll give you a little background on that. Yolele Foods is really a company that's supposed to work with farmers in West Africa and open markets for them. And so this is what I do. I package certain products. You know, we started with Fonio, and package it, and we distribute it in the US. We started distributing Fonio in 2017, and today we are distributing it throughout the country in all the Whole Foods in America, and also serving it at Teranga. And that's just one way to contribute in bringing economic prosperity in rural West Africa, which are the poorest region of the world.
Yes, sir. I certainly want to circle back to Teranga and to Yolele Food. But I think the reason I asked you that question earlier was really more because you have such a strategic mind in terms of the efficacy of the hospitality space, and is the how far you can stretch it. I think some of the lessons that I've learned from watching you work over the years, and the reason I asked the question before was mainly because I think there is something really powerful in intention in every aspect of the work you do. And sometimes we have this conversation now in the midst of COVID, in the midst of just a lot of sort of tectonic shifts in the way we operate in our industry. I think some of it is due to the moment, but a lot of it is due to some maybe faulty logic in terms of how we move and operate in the hospitality space. And it has seemed to me watching you over the years that you've done a interesting job, like a really strategic job of thinking about intention in every move. Just even we were talking about the Grand Dakar. I mean, I remember moving back to New York after college and hearing lore of what you were creating there, and having that sort of that legacy of the specificity of how you move in hospitality spaces, be able to take you and to sort of help you move organically. You talk about organic being a through line in your whole journey, but it really feels like it's more intention, right? Like this sort of, if you are centered in intention in every move, then yeah, the universe meets you where intention takes you, right? Like, I don't know. It's just, I say that just to say that I'm so inspired by the way you move through the world, because it doesn't have to compromise your integrity or your point of view, but it amplifies it in a way that shifts everything, right? I think that a lot of the conversations we have now around the connection between diaspora is due to the successes you've had and the spirit that people have sort of gotten from coming from, or sort of having an attachment to your work, whether it's in your books, having tasted your food, having heard you speak. It all kind of imprints on the way we think, on our possibilities, right? The thought around how dexterous we could make this space move or be. There aren't really the limitations on hospitality we think there may be if we maybe thought more like you.
Oh, there's so
I,
many more coming and doing greater things. There's so much to
yeah,
do, and then absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
I Again, there's so many places we could go with this conversation, but if you willing, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about your Lily food, because I really think I remember kind of the beginnings of it, or hearing you talk about the beginnings of it, many years ago. And I'm thinking about people like Stephen Satterfield, who was thinking about a connection between America and diaspora as it relates to wine. I'm thinking about some folks who are doing efforts that are thinking about lots of other specific products, but your thought around the economic empowerment that has to be present when having these very particular commercial conversations is fascinating. And I'm wondering about not so much Wafonia first, because I think it's pretty clear, but where else really food is going, because I think that there's such a particular wealth of like opportunity in this space of, because there's a savior complex sometimes people think about when they think about the commercial connection, and it's not that at all for you. It's really about sort of using, it's this straight spine thought around the bounty and the specificity of the legacy of West Africa, and like almost like shifting center out, even outside of like the idea of being Black, right? This idea of the specificity of cultures that you are coming into that give you the best practices you should sort of use to have this cross-continental conversation. So I don't know, I'm wondering about like where you see, like what your vision is and what the future looks like.
Oh wow, beautiful question. And to me, the work is not done until we really reach our community, and it's there's so much more to be done. What I'm doing with smallholder farmers in West Africa is something we should be able to do with smallholder Black farmers here in America, because from smallholder Black farmers in America do not get the support that they need to get, and unfortunately we don't realize until they get that support, this food system is doomed. We're still going to be the one at the short end of it. We're still going to be living in food deserts. But if smallholder farmers are getting support from the system, or from us, it should start with us, but from the system as well. And in addition to that, not only the smallholder farmers, but even urban farmers. Urban farmers is something we need to consider, urgently, because this food system is falling. This food system has failed us. Big agri has failed us. When we're talking about Climate change, for instance, it's a reality, and a big part of it is caused by big agri, by the food system. That's something that we don't talk about enough. You know, monoculture is like is doesn't work. You know, the traditional agricultural system, the way we've been doing it, the way our ancestors been doing it, where they grow their crops in rotation and considering the earth and taking care of the soil and loving the soil, is something that's just sustainable. This big agri system is not sustainable. And until we return to this traditional system, which is the way our people know how to grow it, and by supporting Black farmers in America, by supporting urban farming, there's no way out. There's no way out, because we need to figure out a way to feed a planet that's going to grow to 10 billion people soon. And this system is not working. We need to diversify our diet. This system is not offering us a diversity in our diet. We still eating four crops. We're eating corn, wheat, soy, and what else? I mean, this is just pathetic. There's thousands of crops that are there that are better for us, better for the planet, and we are ignoring them. Fonio is just one of them. And the soil is going to give it back to us. We don't need to put all these nutrients. We don't need any chemicals in the soil to grow. It's just this capitalistic system that's like thinking only profits, and profits for the corporate pockets, but not profits in terms of like health, nutrition, not and environment. That's just the thing that's wrong. So a long way to say that what I'm doing with the farmers in West Africa is something that also needs to be done with the farmers here, Black farmers, small Black farmers in America, the small ones. We don't want monoculture. We don't want people that take like more land than they can need, that they can use, and it just doesn't make any sense. So we need to support, we need to change to this mindset shift and start focusing on small farmers, on urban farming, and targeting the people that need to be receiving good nutrition, like those communities that don't have food, that have food desert, you know. And for me, also bringing these ingredients to America or to this part of the world is also a way to have African American, the diaspora, have access to the heritage food of their ancestors. You know, it's like that's the kind of food that our system needs to eat. You know, we're talking about all these allergies we are dealing with. We're talking about diabetes. We're talking about all cholesterol, blood pressure, all those ills that you see in our community, obesity and all that. They're connected with this diet that's like being imposed upon us, and that's not our traditional diet. So we need to have at least to have that choice. And you need to have diversity in our diet. Everyone needs to have access to diversity. If you don't have diversity, we're talking about diversity in it's a big talk right now, but even in our food, it's important. Biodiversity, saving the biodiversity is important. Supporting Black farmers is key. Again, is key to our survival. So yes, this is the next step.
Like I was just like, amen to all of that. Because I guess I'm thinking about people like Karen Washington. I'm thinking about people like, I just got to talk to Dr. Heber Brown, who's leading a church-led movement in the same sort of spirit, but just this sense that, I guess I asked that question also because I think very often this issue around food source and food system, chefs aren't necessarily as integral a part to that conversation as they should be, especially as it relates to the blind spots. So your point about like the connection to small farmers is 100% right, but it also would force you and would ask chefs to then think about how they contextualize the way they purchase, how they create menus, like all of that. But if you shifted your entire practice and thought more about the diaspora, it would force you in the most amazing ways to think more about small farmers, because it would encourage you to look for ingredients in a way that had to shift. Like that, it shifts perspective all like immediately.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. So, like again, so many things to talk about. I would love if you could. I think that there's something like you talked about Taringa a little bit, And I live in Harlem. I live in East Harlem as well. You're like 5 minutes from me. And something about having Teranga in a neighborhood, something about the the energy of it. It's home in the Africa Center. Um, Also thinking about the forthcoming African American exhibit from MoFat, like all of this sort of, and especially like even its positioning at the top of like Museum Mile, and like this particularity in that particular neighborhood of Harlem. I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about that and like how that project came about, because it's not just gratifying to have you in a neighborhood, but it's like I don't know, it feels like a statement of intent for what is possible for Harlem in a lot of ways. Some you mentioned JJ Johnson, like JJ coming to the neighborhood, but also um, just the sort of rethinking of Restaurant Road, and sort of like lifting up people like Melba Wilson, but just what Harlem could look like if we thought more about um, changing our priorities. And Taranga just feels like that to me. So I don't know. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about people who maybe haven't had the opportunity to go in. I know outside is not quite open yet fully, but just Taranga, like if you want to talk about some of how you all have regrouped via COVID, and just because it's just such a special place, and I think having your words sort of share with folks what it really is going to be helpful, because it's just so powerful.
Thank you. And yes, you're right about intention, and you absolutely right to get me back to that. Intention was always part of it, and in the beginning also when I started, it was an intention to bring this food culture. I was at the time I was in the late 80s, early 90s, in New York City. There was no such thing as African food. African food was like, and yet New York was calling itself the food capital of the world, But, we are used to that world where Africa is not, Africa is just this dark continent, how they like to see it. And I was like, wow, I appreciate the food that I see here, but I also know that the food I ate growing up has a place, because that's just the most delicious food. And that's how this whole thing started. So the intention was there from the beginning, and the intention also to open my restaurant in Black communities, like it was always the case. It was like opening Yolele in Bed-Stuy, then Grand Dakar in Clinton Hill, and now Teranga in Harlem. It was always that, and not to mention even returning to Africa and opening Nok in Lagos and the Pullman in Dakar. So that was always the intention. And Teranga, to get back to it, at the Africa Center has been a project for a very long time, and it's
Yes,
been a
sir.
long time coming. It started with a museum, and then it was transformed into Africa Center. And then, meanwhile, Teranga concept was already there, and we had this vision of this fast casual West African restaurant that will really like connect us with our community and show the beautiful side of our culture. And as you enter Teranga, you can see, you have this book area, because it's important to have the books too. And the book area is really about, I mean, you can tell about more about it, but it's really about the great authors that just spanned our community, over the centuries, and you have access to those books. They can be about food, about culture, about politics, and everything.
That's right.
Because food is all that. Food is politics, and so Teranga, before COVID, just before COVID hit, we were about to expand and open 2 new locations, and one was going back to Brooklyn. Still in the fast casual concept in Brooklyn. We were going to be at the DeKalb Market. We're still planning to be there. Actually, we just have to think Teranga 2.0 now, and we're in that phase. Teranga 2.0 is the phase where we're going to be, but still more intentional, but accelerate the vision. Instead of letting COVID scare us, it's really we see it as an opportunity to grow faster.
That's right.
Towards that direction. And my dream is to have Teranga in our communities throughout the continent, throughout the country, throughout America, actually. So we've proven that it's a possibility. People are afraid of being in our community, so that makes it even a greater opportunity. So and hopefully we'll show other people. It will encourage other people to come and invest in our community. Black people, of course, to come and invest in our community, because there's so much to bring and so much to gain. So much to gain, really. I mean, you can't even stress how much the reward when you realize when someone comes to your restaurant and he hasn't had the opportunity to have this kind of food, which is the food that really resonates to her or him, and says it to you, it's so rewarding. It's not, forget the dollars. I mean, the dollars are important, but there's so much more to get when you realize that you are bringing something positive, you are making a change, and that's really, humbly saying though, but that's really something
No, it's
that's
true.
key. That's really key. That's really key, and that's moving. That happens so many times. I get messages. I get people who wants to talk directly, and sometimes, especially when it's come from older folks, that's really so moving, and I encourage other people to do the same thing, because it's priceless. It's priceless.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm still thinking about that salmon. I like that something about the taste of the things you find. I think we all have an experience when we go to restaurants, irrespective of the cultures from which they come, but the dining experience, right? That taste that you can't keep out of your mind and you need to go back for, like those dishes and those restaurant experiences you have everywhere you go, where it's like the one reason you go back to a restaurant, and like you are surprised every time by maybe new things, but just something about having a place like Teranga that is so beautiful aesthetically, but then has such consistency and is so delicious. But like you could come, I mean, so it's for this neighborhood, it's been a game changer. It's the place you want to go and have a meeting. It's the place you want to go and get a quick lunch. But it's also a place where there's so much culture happening on top of the food, that makes it, I don't know, just really singular in the way you think about restaurants. Um, yeah, we're doing pretty good on time, and I want to leave room for folks if they have questions. But I would love if we could pivot maybe to your writing. Your books have really been so rich in culture and context. I have to admit that I've not necessarily ever been a huge cookbook person. I think sometimes, especially as it relates to African American or Black culture globally, there's a lack of narrative, because there's sometimes expectation that there isn't narrative to be had. And some of the most powerful parts of your books, in addition to the recipes and the translation of a culture I'm unfamiliar with, personally, is the narrative and is sort of the intention behind each book. And so I wonder if you could talk about because we've been having a lot of media conversations about who gets to write what, and the publishing world's response to Black culture. And that's a conversation for maybe someone else to have. I guess I'm really interested in how clear your books have been. And I think that speaks probably a lot to you and the sense of agency you have around your personal narrative and the work you do. So there's certain things that we're never going to have happen in the book that you're going to be attached to. But that specificity is really it does make your books outliers in some ways. And so I'm wondering about just the process of the first one, how it's gotten easier or harder, and I guess just the thought process behind the project, because we think about so long about like how long you have to live with the book process. And you see it give birth, and some people have mixed feelings about it, but you can just talk about your writing process, because they are so clear, and I'm wondering about how you get there.
Thank you so much. Well, it takes me, writing a book really takes me a couple of years, to be honest. And again, there's a process that's somewhat organic, but there's also always an intention. I never wanted my cookbook to be just your typical cookbook where like the chef who has recipes and beautiful pictures of food. I wanted the cookbook to have a meaning, to be a tool and that tool for me was had different roles. One of them, like we're talking about, was to connect me with my audience, in a way that's like very meaningful. And when I talk about the meaningful way, I want, for instance, the African American reader who reads this book to read it in the way and see and sees through a culture that is also his or hers, you know. And food is like the excuse in the book. It's really the excuse because it's more than just the food. It goes beyond the food. Food plays its role of uniting us, of connecting us. But if you see, for instance, my first cookbook, Yolele, when you see throughout the book, you'll see I worked on it with this amazing photographer, Adam Bartos, and throughout the book, you'll see portraits of women, African women, you know, all dressed in beautiful colored garbs and dresses, florals, and that's just a way for me to know that these women and to really recognize their role, the role that they played. Women of the book Yolele is a homage to the women of the African diaspora, because these are absolutely these are the women who kept us alive. You know, the fact that they are the only one in the kitchen at the time just is something that played such an important role because of that mission they had. You know, they had to teach their daughters, and their daughters had to teach their daughters, and that's how it kept going. And that's because of that skill, we were able to transcend our cuisine through the Middle Passage and bring this same knowledge and this same beautiful culture. And that's just so amazing that we were able to do that. We didn't have the tradition of writing our recipes down, but we kept those recipes alive. And that's why, you know, even though I decided to sit down and write it down, I had to recognize that it was from them. You know, I had to make the book about them. And that's throughout the book, you'll see portraits, like pages of portraits of these books, of these women. You know, it was like really recognizing that I owe everything. This book is all about them. It's without them, there's no such thing as this book. And there's no such thing as us Black folks, because we survived thanks to them. We survived all these horrific situations thanks to these women. And,
Yes,
you know, they're a gentle force. So the second cookbook, I wanted the second cookbook, Senegal, to be a continuation. You know, I always want to have a continuation in my process. You know, it happened with the restaurants. It also happened with the books. You know, so the second cookbook, since the first one was about the women and the food that I ate when I was growing up, when I grew up in Senegal, the food that inspired me. The second cookbook wanted to be about where is that food coming from. So I traveled at the source of the food, you know, the farmers, the fishermen, those communities, the food producers. And because we never talk about them, you know, we see a cookbook and we see these beautiful recipes and these beautiful dishes, but where is this food coming from? Where are these ingredients? Who's behind making this food grow? Who's the farmer, rice farmers? Who's the okra farmer? You know, who's the fisherman? What's his challenges or her challenges? So throughout the book, I have chapters where I spend time with you know, women growing rice, harvesting rice in Casamance in the south of Senegal, for instance. And spending time with them, I realized that these women harvesting rice is just like the same way, because it's okay, little story, the way they harvest rice, you see in the book, they in row and they're chanting, but the chanting is to encourage them because that's hard work, you know. And that chanting, the music is, I swear, it's exactly, if you're familiar with what we call the Negro spirituals, you know, at the time, it's that's that chanting that we would, and the labor songs that we used to have in the plantations. That's what's happening. We were singing because that was a method for us to keep the work going, you know, and those women are still doing it in Casamance today, you know, and I found it when I was writing this book. So that became some kind of an anthropological work. This is what my book has become, you know, when you travel to the source and you just tell the story of those people. So that's an easy process because I'm just like taking the story and translating it in the pages. So after the farmers, the women farmers, I spent time with the fishermen, for instance, in Senegal. And the fishermen, I found out that they are being exploited. You know, they have these traditional dugout boats, and now they're competing with like these big boats from like coming from Japan and from Korea and from Europe, and they're just completely exploiting the water, our waters, and our fishermen are left with no future. So talking about recipes, talking about Thiam dishes that uses those fish, I have to talk about what the plight of those fishermen, and that becomes part of it, and so on and so forth. In the book, I talk about palm oil, for instance, and all these propaganda on palm oil and how,
Okay.
they demonized it, but yet palm oil is the most nutritious, what you would call a superfood by excellence. But of course, the way it's being exploited by corporate, the way it's being exploited, and the forests that are being destroyed to make palm oil plantation, we have to talk about it, but that shouldn't be at the detriment of palm oil itself. Palm oil is an ingredient that African folks have been using for a very, very long time, and it's also a most nutritious ingredient. You have to be mindful of how you source it. You have to source it properly. You have to source it in a way that's natural, that's organic. You don't source palm oil from people that destroying plantation like they are doing it in Southeast Asia. You source palm oil the way they're doing, the way they're still sourcing it in countries like Togo or Ghana or some parts of Brazil. That's just the way you have to think. You have to have discernment. And this is the kind of thing I want when I talk about it in my book. I really want the reader to take away something that will allow him to make the right choices, him or her to make the right choices when they source the ingredients. And source them this way, you support our community, you support our farmers, and you support yourself because you have a better nutrition. So that's really how this book came to be. The last book now, Fonio, is a single ingredient cookbook. It's really about this ingredient that I really think is so important. It's probably the oldest cultivated ingredient in Africa. It's been around for 5,000 years. So all of us from the diaspora, our ancestors have had fonio. Ancient Egyptians used to bury their dead people with fonio. Archaeologists found fonio in pyramids. So it's and wherever you go, fonio is considered like a grain that's culturally so relevant. The Dogon people call it the seed of the universe. And in Kedugu, there's the grain they give to their guest of honors. So it's really like a grain that's so amazing. But in addition to that, it's gluten-free, it's nutritious. It cooks in 5 minutes. It's very delicate. And it has a neutral taste that you can, use for different. It's very versatile. You can use it for different recipes. So this book was about that. I needed to write a book on that, not only because my company is promoting fonio and is bringing it, supporting farmers, but also because it's a grain that's great for the environment. It's a grain that grows in poor soil. It's drought resistant. Its agriculture allows the soil to be restored. So it's also for all those reasons. And most importantly, it supports the farmers in rural West Africa that are among the poorest farmers in the world, just because they don't have markets for their most amazing products. So that's why I wrote this last book. The next book now, I don't know what it's going to be about, but it's going to be a process. There's going to be a next one.
We want it. And I think it speaks also to I think sometimes we lament the lack of progress in certain spaces, whether it be media, whether it be the hospitality industry, whether it be whatever, the social climate, and we lament progress as though dismantling systems that don't work shouldn't take as much time as it took to build them up. And so I see in your work something in, yeah, first of all, let me just say that when Your Lily came out, when I first read it, it was just, I was like, is Chef Pierre a feminist? Like, what's going on? Because there's a way in which there's a reverence you have for women and a reverence you have for the women who gave you this lineage that came across really strongly. But it's almost like, okay, you can't have a specified and so nuanced conversation until you lay groundwork. So you give us context, you give us a taste of Senegal through the lens of women, you give us foundation, then you give us Senegal in a way that asks us to think about the culinary aspect, right? Like how we think about the dining posture. And then you get to be more specific, you get to be more nuanced with fonio, because then it becomes this thing about commerce, this thing about how you integrate what you learned in the previous two books, how you get to integrate that into the choices you make in the products that you patronize. But I also think there's something really powerful in the posture of specificity in terms of the single subject, because typically single subject books are going to be about, I don't know, ingredients that people are comfortable with or have a lot of reference for, and they can kind of intrigue in a way that is maybe less challenging. And you're asking us to think very broadly about our value system, about where we put our dollars, and about what systems we uphold. So I don't know. I'm waiting for the next one. I also want to be respectful of your time. We started a little late, and we're going to be kind of coming to the hour really quickly. But I also wanted to see if you were interested in talking a little bit about your media presence, because something about your intentionality and your ethics translate to how you tell story in media spaces, whether it's from a TED Talk, from your interviews in media spaces, but also I feel like around, and maybe I'm wrong, I felt like there was a documentary or some sort of like on like some of my YouTube deep dives. I feel like there was like a video series where you had gone back to Senegal and like in these space. I remember that really clearly years ago when it was so captivating, and I was always thinking about this moment where it's when it came out. Then it was like this moment where Bourdain was like on television in a really intentional way, and you were looking at all of these figures that we had, and it felt like, why is there not more of this on television? And so I guess I'm thinking about your thoughts around the chef as media personality, and because it just feels like the posture with which you engage that part of your work is really, I don't know, it seems really, it's affirming to watch, because it suggests that there is not one way to be, and you can sort of be yourself and still have that translate. And it's, I don't know, I'm really interested in that process for you.
Thank you. Well, it's again, going back to the organic way, how it's been happening. Someone just mentioned among the audience about the epic Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain, and again, that came to me after Anthony Bourdain had access to my Senegal cookbook, and he really wanted the Parts Unknown to be an episode about the Senegal cookbook and present it this way, and that's something the media is getting so much richer when they give us the way, so that's us, that's us telling the story, our own story. And Tony, I respect him for that. He really, in a sense, if just allowed the book, the episode to be about the book, follow the books. There's even some parts of the book that he wanted to take, but unfortunately the episode was just, we couldn't travel all the way to South Senegal, for instance. And right. That's just been the case. The media is starting to have more of an awareness for it. I heard Netflix is like starting to focus on Black folks and allowing Black folks to write films on Netflix, and that's going to change the face of television, or of the media, because we're going to bring some, no pun intended, some color to it. We're going to bring some real stories, that can connect people with like soulful stories in a sense, And the episode you're talking about was with a crew from National Geographic many years ago, and at the time, we started really with me taking them to an area of Senegal called Kédougou, where I wanted them to see the way those people, the Fonyo community, how they live, And the idea came, is they're like, okay, while we do this, let's do a whole episode about your story and what you're doing and where you came from, and following you all the way from Dakar to Brooklyn. And that's how they ended up calling that episode, From Dakar to Brooklyn. And I'm like, I'm the kind of person who often say yes to projects, because I see that I truly believe the universe has like a way of deciding, and if you're present there, and then just let it go, and it's going to take its own way, as long as you keep your integrity and you tell the story the way you think is right, and the rest is going to work for itself, and if it doesn't work, let it go too, so that's how I do it.
That part is a word, like being able to say no in ways that don't feel like a loss, right? Like I think sometimes there's a push-pull, especially this moment of your point about visibility in Black culture is really powerful, but there seems sometimes like this sense of I've heard people say it often, and I'm unsure that I'm convinced, but the sense of like, this is the moment, we got to kind of take advantage of it. And while there is a certain sense of urgency, I think a bigger sense is essentially the posture you've always taken in your work, right? Like this idea of steadiness and specificity, sort of allowing the universe to meet you where you are. And while attention span is fickle. Like I feel like media spaces in general are fickle. So being beholden to them is not necessarily the smartest move to make. But certainly taking advantage of opportunities when they come, but just being ready, right? Like the work you do makes you disproportionately ready when opportunities come, because that's another part that we don't really talk a lot about in terms of personal responsibility, right? Like if you're doing work in a way that is rooted and intentional, then you don't have to get ready when opportunities come. You sort of are able to meet them regardless of any fickleness of moment. I don't know, Chef. I feel like we might be getting kind of close, and I don't want us to get cut off. But if anybody has any questions, please, like, share them now. But I guess I'm wondering maybe we could not end on, because I think we still have a little bit of time left. But I wonder about what support looks like. I mean, I think I'm looking at like you and JD and a bunch of chefs have sort of responded to COVID in really beautiful ways in terms of feeding community and thinking about the like sort of the purpose of your restaurants and sort of the purpose of like the spaces you occupy and what you can do, right? This sort of all hands on deck kind of approach. And I guess I'm wondering, as like the city is opening back and you may be thinking about next move, how people can more than just support, like maybe what your hope is or your thought is around where we could be maybe looking in terms of priorities that we not maybe not even prepared for the second wave or just whatever, but just more about how you maybe recalibrated in this moment. Have your priorities shifted at all? Especially through this, I mean, the powerful nature of helping, being able to have tangible ways to help in the immediacy of the moment, I'm sure has been a thing, but there's something interesting about the practices that are going to extend beyond the moment. So maybe if you could, are you thinking about maybe something you learned from this moment that you're going to want to keep going past the moment?
Well, absolutely, absolutely, and there's so much lessons from this pandemic, and for us, it's been for the world, it's been a shock and a shift. And at Teranga, we were able to stay open, because we wanted to. We realized, early on, as you know, that the community was really wanted the Teranga, and we wanted also to be in the community. So we first started to work with hospitals, hospitals around, and serving for hospitals and supporting them, and that was a beautiful way to do it. But we also realized early on that those hospitals we were working with, even though that was a great gesture and that was very important to do it because the first responders needed to be supported, but they also don't have any problems, economic problems. They don't have a problem accessing food, and not in a way that our community had. And particularly the community where we are in Harlem, there was, the schools were closed. There was so many children who depended on those schools' lunch to eat. There are shelters. So we started working intentionally with organizations like one amazing one called Harlem Grown. Harlem Grown is this most, Harlem Grown, right? And Tony Hillary. Tony Hillary is a beautiful visionary brother who's in Harlem and who started this movement. I call it a movement, Harlem Grown, because I see it being like, I hope it's going to spread around communities of color in America, that we talk about urban farming. He started urban farming, and the food, the products of these urban farms are distributed like for free in shelters. And this is so beautiful, so beautiful. And so we're working with Harlem Grown, and Teranga has been making food and sending it to those shelters. And we that's one of the most important lessons from COVID. We don't want to return post-COVID to where we were back. We just want to keep supporting. We just want to be a part of the community, continue to be, solution to the challenges that we're facing, And one of the challenges, most important challenge we're facing is our children. The kids do not have access to nutritious food. The kids, even at school, the kind of food they have access to is sometimes poison. You know,
Yes,
you go to the pantry in it's sugar, it's it's carbonated drink, it's soda, it's all